Welcome to Coffee and Geography, where my guests and I geek out about the world and everything on it, discovering that we are all geographers in some way, shape or form. I'm your host, Kit, and my pronouns are they, them or she, her. So settle down with a brew, hit that subscribe or follow button, and enjoy the listen. Hi everybody, welcome back to Coffee and Geography, and I have someone I have known for a very, very long time. I think, I don't know, Bob, what's it been? We've been on the scene as geographers. We've been around each other, hanging about at conferences and stuff like that. I don't know, 15 or so years, maybe.
At least that, yeah.
Yeah, Bob Digby. So you were joining me for a Coffee and Geography finally. Why did it take 3 seasons for me to get you on this podcast, Bob?
I don't know. I'm left wondering that myself, actually. Yeah. Perhaps it's because you didn't call it Gin and Geographers.
Oh yeah, that's
if it had been gin, it might have been an early attraction.
Yeah, there you go, folks. We're already working on we've got espresso and geography, we've got the coffee house, and now we're working to see if we can get another special side hustle in for this podcast. We're going to call it Gin and Geographers. I think we're onto something here. Right, so Bob, everybody, is a former teacher and teacher educator who still believes that no job in the world beats teaching and working with very enthusiastic colleagues and students. Bob now writes geographical resources and textbooks, and leads CPD, which is Career Continuous Professional Development, for those who don't know, and examines at A-level and GCSE. Bob lives with his husband and 2 spaniels at the end of a farm track in South Cornwall, which is wonderful, but you have a need to socialise. I guess that's why you're here with me, Bob.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And loves music, Catholic tastes, reading, crime fiction, films, loves a good romcom, and musical theatre. West Side Story, anyone? I've got a funny little story to tell you about that a bit later, if you remind me. And Twitter. Bob really loves Twitter and geography, although that's obvious. So what a lovely little bio there. So
I do love Twitter, though. I think Twitter's a great forum. Having just come back, 3 weeks ago from the GA conference, one of the pleasurable things there was meeting people I'd only ever met before on Twitter.
Yeah.
And the lovely thing was they were as lovely in real life as they are on Twitter. So I think Twitter gives you a good handle into someone's life and someone's personality. It's great.
Yeah. And I think when some people say social media can be an echo chamber, I always respond and say, yes, potentially, possibly, but it depends on what the kind of content you're after and what kind of feel good vibe or whatever it is you want out of it. If your echo teacher is fellow geographers, then that's brilliant. What's the harm in that at all? You're learning from each other, you're geeking out with each other. Some people only use because I'm also a member of the Star Trek community on Twitter as well, right? So
I never doubted it for a minute.
Yeah, I know. You're not that you'd noticed, but and then just geeking out with fellow trekkers, and we call ourselves Trek Twitter. It's hashtag Trek Twitter, and stuff like that. So yeah, you can get yourself in a very positive, non-toxic echo chamber through Twitter, and ignore all the rest, all the trolls. So it's hard sometimes, but it can be done.
And you can, and I think particularly during the pandemic, there were so many people who were saying, oh, I've got to teach this online or I've got to teach that online. And really, it was the online that was the problem for them. And so that got in the way of helping them to prepare what it was they actually wanted to teach and think about how they might teach it. And there were armies of people out there just saying, well, I've tried this, here's some resources, try that, see how it goes. And there was all that support out there. It's wonderful. That's when you get the best out of teachers, I think. When that group, I don't want to use the word army because it makes it sound big, but when you've got a group of people and you go into a lesson, whether it's online or whether it's in school, knowing that you've got people behind you really matters.
Totally agree. And I think it was on Twitter, Bob, when there was a discussion about what is the collective noun for geography teachers. I think that was actually a Twitter discussion, and I think there was a sort of a consensus that we were going to call ourselves a confluence of geography teachers.
That's an excellent word. Excellent word. Yeah.
So we need
Alistair Hamill would agree with that as well, I think.
Oh,
Alistair
my goodness.
That word.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What a crack.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good old Alistair. Yeah. So that's what we're going for from this point onwards. So if you come across it on Twitter, folks, it probably originated from Twitter, but and I've said it before many times as well, Bob, both at the GA conference, online stuff like that, is that the community that I have found, both online and offline, with the geography teacher community has been, second to almost nothing else, really.
Yeah.
So when COVID came along and we were all forced into lockdown, I mean, I'd already come out of teaching by that point, but when we're all going through COVID, and then I lost my job with the climate science firm, because of the Brexit mostly. And I started to feel very lonely and isolated. And I was thinking to myself, well, I feel so detached from everything, but of course I could get in with the fellow Trekkies and stuff like that. That's always a place you can go to. But in terms of my core identity of a geographer,
Yeah.
I never ever felt out of place in the geography teacher community. No one ever made me feel, oh well, Kit, you're not at the chalk face anymore. It's nice that you're still here, but you're one of those now, outside looking in. You're not at the chalk face. Your opinion doesn't matter. I never felt like that. I
No.
was always meant to feel welcome, always meant to feel valued. So
Yeah, I feel
thank you,
exactly the
folks.
same thing. I mean, I'm 74 next birthday, and really, I should have retired, 10 years ago. But people still seem to be pleasant, and they think that I deserve the same kind of support as anybody else, and
Yeah,
so that's it. It's great. It's lovely to feel that, because I don't want to retire. I've never wanted to retire,
yeah.
and it's good that people still think that they'll listen to you and that you've got something to say, and you can get that support from people who are sometimes 50 years younger than you.
Yeah, and also the other thing that I love about remaining as a member of the geography teacher community is that I'm still learning so much.
Yeah,
It's
tell
like,
me
which is
about it.
so
Tell me about it.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Alistair Hamill when he puts up all his stuff on his Twitter feed, with his talking about tectonics and things like that, and the way he uses visualizations and stuff. And you've got Brendan Conway and his
Oh,
GIS
I
stuff,
know.
and you've got I could ring off so many different people, and then what Shanique Harris is doing at the RGS. It's just Iram Samir bringing her perspective in. It's just you. Yeah,
Well, you're
I
still
don't know what else to
learning.
say. Yeah,
That's how I feel about it. You're still learning. I mean, I remember Alistair's discussion one evening. He got involved in theories of plate tectonic
yeah,
and how tectonic plates actually moved. And there was all kinds of things that going in there on sort of the physics of slab pull, which
yeah.
were new to me. And it sent me away to the web and specialist textbook. I mean, I'm still a person who was sitting in a sixth form lesson one day, and my geography teacher came in and said, "Rip up all your notes on continental drift, because we have a new theory, which is plate tectonics."
That's awesome.
And so it's a long time ago. It's getting on for 60 years ago, but it's important that we keep that same sort of freshness, and we keep
Yeah.
alive with people who know more than we do. It's wonderful when you meet people who know more than you do. Fabulous.
I think that's also, I wouldn't say it's unique to geography, but it is something special about geography, is that because it's such a wide ranging multidisciplinary thing, that we all have our little areas of expertise. I've got meteorology and climatology and things like that, but then when you speak to someone who's got another expertise, and you link with that overlap, so like someone who's like a geologist, and then you come together where meteorology and geology intersect,
Yeah.
And then you learn from each other, and then you start learning of this, and it's just such a precious, wonderful thing. And then you get a third person comes in, and maybe comes and brings in, maybe I don't know, the social side of things, the way people live and use the land, and how they develop around using the rock types, and based on the weather. And you're like, oh my god, this is you just go deeper and deeper and deeper, and
Do you know what? I think
it's
that
brilliant.
begins very early on.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way you've described it, we support each other through content and things like that, but I think it goes way, way back. Whenever I used to take sixth form groups on their first or second field trip, we always did it in all the schools I taught in. We did a field trip in year 12 and one in year 13. And whenever, particularly in year 12, you got back from your first field trip and you'd had, say, 4 nights away, staying in youth hostels and things like that, and you'd get into school on the Monday morning, and the geographers would be huddled together. They'd left their previous friendship groups, and they would all huddle together, and they were laughing, swapping memories. Do you remember the time when there'd be a kind of commonality of banter, of people doing ridiculous things, or people just taking part in work activities, in being part of a team. And I think that's where it goes back to. I think we get that early, what would I call it? It's almost like demonstrating a role that teachers do with students, that they try and get students to work collaboratively, be collaborative and support each other. And if you don't have a full set of results, here are mine you can copy. If you've been doing all the measurements and you didn't get a chance to measure it, and here are my results, you can copy them. And it's that kind of thing,
That's true, actually.
I think we've got a lot to owe our early geography teachers who set this all up for us. We stand on the shoulders of giants. It's a cliche, but we do.
Certainly do. That actually brings back memories. So folks who are not aware of the English system, so year 12 is like 16, 17 years of age. Year 13 is 17, 18. So if you're in the States, that's kind of like your sophomore and senior years and whatnot. But I think the memory from when I was teaching, and I gave this a go, one of my first things, and my head of department at the time thought I was nuts to do this, is that I was like, I'm going to let the kids take control of the fieldwork.
Yes.
Like, okay, fine. And then I come in as this fresh-faced teacher, and I went, no, I want the kids to kind of like take control of this. And so we, so one things we did one year is that we took them to the good old Norfolk coast.
Yep.
And some of the kids were more interested in the human side of things, the settlements on the coast. Why are there sea defences in some places and not other places? But there are others who were really keen on the physical things, and like, what are those sea defences doing to the natural environment, or how are the sand dunes being interrupted by human influence, or how are they being protected, or how do they work? What's the succession and the vegetation that's growing on the sand dunes? I'm like, oh my God, it's like, we're only out for one day, right? So then I thought, okay, no, I've got an idea. I said to everybody, right, you've just told me all the things that you're interested in that we could do on the coast, which it was a great retrieval practice, actually, because we'd just done a unit on coasts, and they had told me all these things that we'd learned, so I thought, crikey, so right, we've got all this. Right, I'll tell you what we'll do then. Get yourself a Post-it and write down your top choice of those things. What do you really, really fancy the most? And then stick it up on the board. And I found out there was quite an even spread between things. I was like, interesting, right? So they put their names on their Post-its, and I just shuffled them around on the screen. They went, what are you doing? I was like, wait a minute. I was like, oh, this is perfect. I can get you organised in groups where you've got equal representation of all these topics in a group. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You're going to become experts in the thing that you're passionate about, but then I'm going to mix you up in the groups. So when you go on the fieldwork for the day, you're all going to be doing that leadership, that little bit for the bit that you love. So there was one young lady, Amy. She's brilliant. She was on the leadership team, who really wanted to do the dunes and do the long profile of the dunes, and she was so keen to do that. And so she got in a group with other people interested in dunes, and she learned how to use a clinometer and the ranging poles and the stuff like that. And so when she got her little group together, she then would teach the rest of them how to do it. And I was there on the field work, Bob, just sitting there on the seawall watching this happen. It's like, these kids are just going, they're doing it themselves, they're motivated. Yes. And as you said, if we didn't get the finished thing in time, they got back to lessons the following day. Didn't quite catch that result. Can I copy your results from you?
Yes. Just like university researchers are doing up and down the country.
Yeah,
they're getting research data from the situations, the experiments they've set up, and they're swapping each other's data, because that's how you learn. That's how you build a bank of data and understanding.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were talking, I was just thinking of several students who were on the first cohort that I ever taught of what was known as the 16 to 19 Geography Project. Mm-hmm. In the middle 1980s. So we're talking nearly 40 years ago, but it was a project that aimed to engage and involve young people in geography, and political understanding was one of its aims, and it guaranteed independence of learning, and teachers were encouraged, and some teachers found this really hard, teachers were encouraged to take students and do exactly as you've described in the field, to almost go out and do a kind of recce. What are the possibilities?
Yeah.
You suss out the landscape, what potentials it got. Well, I took this group I'm thinking of to Holderness.
Oh yeah.
which is, like the Norfolk coast that you described. It has its villages which are fast eroding into the sea. It has places which are protected and places that aren't protected. All these questions were coming out, and I just gave them almost like a kind of journalist's brief. Go and find out.
Yep.
And come back with the questions that you've been asking, and come back with the questions that you'd like further information about, and what you've been finding out and who you found it out from. Do you know those kids didn't stop talking?
Oh, that's brilliant.
They got back about 6 o'clock. We had a quick dinner, and they wanted to work. And I finally had to stop them and turn them to go to bed at 11 o'clock at night. They were still talking. It was the
That's
most
amazing.
wonderful experience. It was the
Yeah.
most fabulous experience. We need to let go sometimes as teachers. We've
Yeah.
been encouraged to think, this is the content I've got to get through today, or this is what we're going to go to North Norfolk because it shows us how cliffs erode, and I'm going to teach them about how cliffs erode, not about how we respond to the landscape as human beings and so on. So
Yeah.
I understand everything you were saying there. My mind was alive with all these memories of past students.
Yeah, and it was just so lovely. Like when the kids would rotate around and do things. So when a group went on to do the sand dunes, the kid who chose to specialize in that was really fired, really motivated in leading their group, and it was a rising tide for everyone else in that group who didn't choose that option. And then when they went around to look at the sea defenses, and then the child in that group was interested in the sea defenses, and so they took the lead of the group because they to do what they want to do. It rose everybody else up because, and then of course when you get back into class and everything, and then you talk about how all these things link together, and then they're talking and sharing those experiences and go, oh well, yeah, of course those sand dunes wouldn't be that shape if the seawall wasn't there down there a few hundred meters away and stuff like that. It's like, yes, it's just like.
And the most valuable thing about it all, we give them all a voice.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all about having a voice.
Yeah.
So important.
I know, it's beautiful. Right, we can wax lyrical about this all the time, and folks know that student voice is something I'm very passionate about. But before we do, let's bring it back to you a bit more, Bob, and South Cornwall. So,
yes.
So you're near Mevagissey, I believe. Is
Yes,
that right?
That's right. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got what I like to do at this, folks, as folks know, is I got my map up to have a look around. What a beautiful part of the world is. Right. Okay. So. How shall I approach this question? So usually what I say, Bob, is I usually say, if you could describe your identity through your location, I mean, are you Cornwall born and bred? Did you move? Are you an immigrant into Cornwall, or so have you brought some kind of identity down with you? What is it about Cornwall? Yeah, so what is it about Cornwall that speaks to you as your identity? And how has it maybe mingled with something in your past as well?
Well, first of all, I'm an Essex boy. I was born in Essex.
I'm an Essex girl, so Harlow.
Yeah, well, Chelmsford in my case, and
you're only up the road from me.
Yeah. And my parents always had a passion for Cornwall. We went on holiday to Cornwall 3 times before we finally took the decision to move. And for the first 5 years, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. We lived down, guess what, at the end of a farm track, which is very similar to the kind of place I live in now. But when you're aged 11 to 15 or 16, that's not much fun. I was used to living in a village where there were lots of people. The people I went to school with were the friends I saw at weekends and that kind of thing. And suddenly it became quite a lonely existence. But Cornwall eats at you like that while all that was going on and while I was conscious of all that, I began to notice that I love the north coast beaches of Cornwall, and I like the south coast. The sort of, I suppose you call it just a fishing village. That's what Mevagissey is now. It's a fishing village, and the character of those. And I went to school in St Austell, and I had an outstanding geography teacher, but I also had a very, very good history teacher, whose love was history and the landscape.
Oh, nice.
And who came to Cornwall because he was interested in learning about the history of the Industrial Revolution through landscape. If any of the listeners know the W.G. Hoskins book, The Making of the English Landscape, when he used to teach me, it was all about W.G. Hoskins' Making of the English Landscape. And I read that when I was about 16, cover to cover. It's one of the very few. I'm not an academic, but I read it cover to cover at the age of 16 and loved that book. Because I could recognize what Cornwall meant to me, that it was about the past, in the landscape. It was about process in the landscape, historical process, but geological process, geomorphological process. I was learning all these things. And when I left to go to university at age 18 and I went to Kiel, all that was kind of further developed by the holidays when I came home to Cornwall. But I then got a new infusion of knowledge about geology. Because if you did geography at Kiel University, where I studied for 4 years, you had to do geology as a subsid. And anybody who loves geology, they're immediately a friend, because I love geology and I love the 2 years that I spent doing geology as a subsid. But every time I ever got thinking about geology, somehow Cornwall was always there as a hook to hang it on.
Right.
It's like it had eaten its way into my system. And so even though I went to Nottingham to do my PGCE in, strangely actually, history and humanities rather than geography, the very first teaching practice I was ever asked to, first class I was ever asked to teach was a class about Japan and geography and the geology of Japan. And again, the examples I was giving from them, I suddenly found at one point I'd lapsed into not teaching about the geography of Japan. It was about the geography of Cornwall and the geology of Cornwall and what we could learn from the geology and the landscape. And every time that I've ever thought about, I went to teach in Leeds. I remember during the summer of 1976 that everybody in my generation remembers, I would wake up on sunny days and wonder what the north coast beaches of Cornwall looked like in that same weather. Leeds was lovely. I loved Leeds, but what did Cornwall look like? It was always there. So Cornwall does eat its way into your landscape. It does identify with you. It's a pretty landscape. It's a varied landscape. It's a very human landscape and a historical landscape. And I love it. But as you pointed out in the blurb that I sent you before we began this, I do need to see people. I'm very much a social being. And when you're living down at the end of a farm track, sometimes you don't see all the people that you really would like to see. And I've had friends, because I've taught in different places in Leeds and Sheffield and London and so on. I have friends all over the country and I want to see those friends, and I miss those friends sometimes. So Cornwall is all about a kind of yin and yang. It's got so much to offer, but it's also saying to you, you're not going to get everything you want down here. It's not perfect. It's a bit like those programs that Simon Reeve has done on Cornwall, where he's shown the poverty behind the landscape.
Right.
There is that, but I think he's shown people a version of Cornwall that they might not see if they came down here on holiday. And all power to his elbow. And it's a bit like that with me. There are all those visible bits that I love and really want to be part of, but equally, there's some part of it saying to me, "I'm not going to give you everything."
Isn't that? But that in itself is enticing and romantic. Really, I think I'm also, as you know, but I'm also being I'm a sci-fi fancy geek. I do buy into this. It was a narrative of the Matrix as well. I do kind of buy into this. You don't really want a full utopia, because there's to be human is to challenge yourself, is to struggle in some ways.
Yes.
And so it's almost as though Cornwall can speak to that kind of person, that like it has all this beauty, but it's not a utopia, and it's always gets you thinking about what else there is that you could be missing.
Yes,
but it's romantic.
Certain things are lovely about it. I mean, if you go to a bus stop anywhere in Cornwall, I mean, and there was somebody else standing at the bus stop, you would be considered really rude if you didn't speak to them.
All right.
You would just start up a conversation. Now, anybody listening to this broadcast who lives in London will think how strange to talk to people standing at bus stops. I mean,
yes,
you just don't find that.
Or just in Chelmsford or Harlow, to be honest.
Or Chelmsford and Harlow, absolutely.
I mean, you mentioned about obviously the geology of the area is such a fascinating thing. I mean, you've got Dartmoor itself, which sticks up as it does, but it's got that unique geology around it, and which is pretty cool.
It looms, does Dartmoor. Yeah.
So that the granite intrusion that comes up, and and you've got that. And then you go towards the north coast, in Exmoor National Park, and you've got those sandstone formations and things like that
Yes.
have been quite very, very stratified and squished and things.
Yeah.
It's just you've got such a variety of stuff in that landscape. But I'm really interested about what you said about. You mentioned about how the geology links in with the human landscape, and you mentioned about the geology
Yeah.
and there's a link between geology and poverty. So you just elaborate on that a little bit, because when you said that really fascinated me.
Yeah. One of the parts of Cornwall that I'm really fascinated by is West Cornwall. It's known that the whole area to people who know Cornwall is Cape Cornwall, and it's the area that's bounded by Penzance, Land's End, and St Ives, and it's the bit where Poldark was filmed. Everybody knows it from television and having seen Poldark. But the relationship there is really strong between people and geology, because copper and tin reserves were found there many centuries ago. And during the Industrial Revolution, the workers would walk really sometimes down very, very dangerous cliff faces to get to work in the mines. And they would face equally dangerous environments when they got to the mine to dig out the veins of tin and copper. So there's that fascination. But there's also the beauty in the fact that that's been left. It's been left for people to see. And mining is a kind of, well, it's a gift and it's a problem, as many geographers have pointed out, because while it brings, during times of prosperity, it brings jobs. During times of falling values overseas, falling tin values, falling copper values, and so on, it leaves people unemployed. And without a welfare state to support them, then it means that poverty becomes a real problem. And so the people, certainly in the 19th century, had no option but to leave, whether it was Canada or Australia. The Cousin Jacks, if any of the listeners know Show of Hands, the folk group, one of their best known songs is called Cousin Jack, and it's about the miners who went to South Australia to dig out the tin and the copper there because there was more of it, and therefore they'd have jobs for longer.
Wow.
So there's all that sort of dimension, that interaction of people and landscape, and how the Cornish have responded to poverty in the past by actually getting up on their 2 feet and moving to sometimes very distant parts of the world.
That's just so fascinating. And you're right. If you go there as a tourist and you go there for the beaches and you go there for the landscape and you go hiking, absolutely brilliant. But this is just what makes it, for me, so fascinating. If you take the time to go to museums, look at the history, read those plaques, why is that street named that? Even such as simple as that. I can't think of is there a street name near where you are which like testifies to the history of the area? I mean, like here in Norwich, for example, we've got Gas Hill. Gas Hill is a very famous road in Norwich.
Yeah.
It's about almost a 30-degree incline, and it's called Gas Hill because that's where one of the major gas terminals is, and the old gas structure is actually still there on the hill. So
yeah, Cornwall is more, I think, wedded to its historical names. So there's quite a significant increase in Cornish nationalism, not in a political sense, though I think there are people clearly who would love to see Cornwall as an independent state. I mean, I'm quite sure there are those people there.
yeah.
But I think the big contribution at the moment is the cultural contribution of the Cornish language and Cornish landscape to a kind of Cornish sense of being. And I think, really going back to the first question you asked about what Cornwall means to me, is I think the more you know Cornwall and the more you understand Cornwall. And it's that understanding. I can't say for all the 15 years or so that I lived in London that I understand London. I wish I did, because I love London dearly. I really do. It's almost as much a part of me as Cornwall is, but I don't understand London in the same way. I do have a deep understanding of Cornwall and what it means to be Cornish and to feel connected to the landscape and the people and the history and everything around you.
Hi folks, a chance for you to recharge your brew, but also a polite prod to remind you that it's so easy to support this podcast. Simply liking, sharing, rating and reviewing means that it will get on more people's radar. Also, there are a few links down in the description which may be of mutual benefit. Please do check them out. So we were talking about books, a little bit there, and you do love your reading your crime fiction and your rom-coms, watching your rom-coms. So what's the so what would you say is your favorite fiction book and maybe your favorite rom-com at the moment? It might change and fluctuate, but if you were on your desert island disc, Bob, what would you
Favorite
say?
fiction book is actually nothing to do with crime novels, because my
Oh,
favorite
okay.
books is actually the Tales of the City series by Armistead Maupin,
Okay.
which are just wonderful books. They give a sense of place through San Francisco. They're about the early emergence of a gay culture and gay identity and gay liberation and gay anxiety, and about AIDS in the 1980s and what that meant to be gay.
Right.
They are wonderful books. They're funny, they're human, they'll make you laugh, they'll make you cry in equal measure, and full of the most wonderful characters. So that's my favorite. That without any doubt at all. If I was asked by what sort of book would I take to a desert island, that would be it, because I could read it over and over.
Wow. So Tales of the City is a series of 9 novels written by American author Armistead Maupin from 1978 to 2014.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean,
Greatest books ever written, no doubt about it in my mind. The greatest books ever written.
Tales of the City, more Tales, it further Tales City, Baby Cakes,
Right.
I'm sure of you, Michael Tovia Lives,
And
Mary
you
Ann
haven't read
Norton.
them?
I haven't. And for someone who loves
must
San
do.
Francisco dearly,
You must read them. Sorry, that sounds bullying. I'm telling you what to do.
No, I think it's a great recommendation. I mean, San Francisco is one of the the Bay Area was a catalyst for me, finding my identity as an
Yes.
LGBT individual, and
Yes.
it seems to me, as both as a geographer and as a member of the LGBT community, it seems this will be right up my street.
Yeah.
So I will
Yeah.
I will have a look at that. So we got Tales of the City in terms of a book. So then, what about a rom-com then? So are you like a Love Actually fan and stuff like that?
Oh,
Or
yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think my favorite is probably, and I'm going to go down in so many estimations because of this. My favorite is either The Object of My Affection,
okay,
which is the Jennifer Aniston film.
Jennifer
Jennifer
Aniston,
Aniston, Paul Rudd, and it's just so many great actors and actresses. Is wonderful, and you can watch it so many times over, and it's fun every time. Or do I dare say My Best Friend's Wedding, which I also love. And they're easy films. If it's a wet day in January, you can watch it and love it. And if it's a day in July late at night when you're tired, you've been sleeping out in the sun all day, and you're feeling a bit sunburnt, feeling a bit sorry for yourself, you can just put it on the hard drive and enjoy.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay, no, that's fair enough.
Shallow.
I don't think so, Bob. We've had such a deep conversation. You got to have your shallow, you got to have your pulls and your riffles, Bob.
You have definitely. Yeah.
If you're not a geographer, you have no idea what kind of analogy I just made there, but you have to go look it up.
We'll go with it. We'll go with it.
But yeah, no, I mean, I suppose it counts as a rom-com, but definitely more of a romance than a comedy. But I quite like Serendipity with Kate Beckett. I'm just a massive Kate Beckinsale fan, to be honest.
Yes.
So that's something I really, that's one of my favorite movies in that genre. But you've got, but Love Actually is quite funny because of the connection with my family, because my wife and her mum's side of the family are from Wisconsin. So so the bit where the dude goes to I'm going to go to America and I'm going to meet some American girls, American chicks, and he goes to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And, so, and they're all going like, oh, you're so British, say table. I was like, table.
Yes. Yes.
And it's exactly,
And do you know the Queen and that sort of
yes,
thing?
you know the Queen. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know. So, and but it's so funny because I went over to when I was. I don't know how my parents let me do this, but me and my best friend went over to the USA to stay with a friend in Michigan, and it wasn't like tourist Michigan or anything like that. It was in suburban Detroit, right?
Yeah.
To stay with these friends for a week, and so took us out, did all these things, just what you only do, and because very rarely there's no tourists in that area, like I was like this exotic Brit, and I had the exact same thing. I was like, oh, your accent, it's so lovely. It's like, you say this, it's like, can I burger and fries please? Burger and fries please. Oh, they're so cute. It's like, it's real, folks. That
It
moment in
is.
Love Actually when I go about the British accent, they do.
Yeah.
I played it, I laid it on thick, Bob. I laid it on thick.
No, I think it needs laying on thick.
Oh, right. Oh, I want to. Oh, I just want to move on to next. Right, spilling the beans now, Bob. Right, because
Yeah.
this is this is something I want you to. You said you're not revealing any of your childhood crushes because you had too many. That's fine. That's fine. We can skip that one. We've all had childhood crushes.
Oh, so many though, for goodness sake.
Uh, and you've got here everything has a geographical dimension. Geography is everywhere, but does being a former bus conductor count?
Oh, yes. Great.
Wow.
What a great job.
Okay, so was this in said London you were talking about
No,
earlier? Was it?
this was in Cornwall.
Okay,
The
do tell.
So I was a bus conductor for 3 summers, university vacation time. My parents ran the local pub in a little town in East Cornwall called Callington, and the bus drivers and bus conductors used to come in and drink and eat in there. And so there was a job going, and I got asked if I'd like it, and I didn't think I would. I didn't think I'd like that very much. Do you know, I loved it. Mick, my husband, always says that within me there's a right little performer waiting to get out, and it was great. You could just go onto the buses and be a bit of a performer. You could chat to people, you could talk, and serious.
Yeah.
You could talk funny things. You could pass little jokes. You could cheer up old ladies and old gentlemen and things like that. And no, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I did the shift that none of the other blokes wanted to do, because it was all blokes in those days, but driving buses and conducting
Yeah.
on buses. I got given the shift that was shuffling students around between 3 sites of a school that had recently become comprehensive from being a grammar school and 2 secondary modern schools. It was Saltash School. There's no point in keeping it secret. It's not harming anybody to name the school. It's a lovely school now. It was a lovely school then. But if you had the way that the school worked was, because they were now on 3 separate sites, the kids would have, say, maths on one site, then they go to
No.
geography on another site, and then art on another site. So this bus shift was just shifting kids around the town all day long. The sites were about a mile apart, so the bus was there to get kids to lessons. And the blokes were saying to me before I started, "Oh, you'll have hell with those kids. They're awful," and so on. I loved them. I thought it was great. And I came away at the end of that shift thinking, well, I'll only be a bus conductor during the vacation, but I know I'm going to teach. I just knew it from that point on.
Wow.
So it was a great
Wow.
job. And, traveling around Cornwall in the summer sunshine, being paid for it, was a great job to do. But it gave me that long-term gift, as I call it.
What a great. Oh, that is probably the loveliest my entry into a teaching profession I think I've heard, Bob. That's
Is it?
amazing. Well, seriously, because I would never have thought. So mine was, I suppose mine was classic-ish in a way, typical-ish, is that I did Camp America, and then I really enjoyed looking after the kids at Camp
Yes.
America, and then I thought that when it was time for me to do something postgraduate, I thought, oh, I'll give teaching a go. So I did something with kids. But I never would have seen being a bus conductor leading to a teaching profession. But because that is such a unique story because of that school that had to go 3 different sites and you had to. Wow.
Yeah.
Folks, if can you top Bob's story about how I became a teacher, please? Because if right into coffee and geography, please.
But it
So,
was like a real Damascene moment. You suddenly think, I know what I'm going to do, and I
and then
don't
all of a
think
sudden,
you don't get many of those moments in life. But that was one.
so I mean, let's speak to those who may not know, because we do have some non-teachers listening. So I can probably guess the kind of conversations you would have, and fellow teachers could probably guess the kind of. But can you give us an example of maybe a kind of like a typical kind of bit of banter, a bit of conversation you would have with those kids as you were carting them from as a conductor from one lesson to another?
Well, you could just simply say, which lesson are you going to? And they'd say, oh, maths. Or,
Yeah.
we've got this grumpy geography teacher or something like that. And it would just kind of open up little stories that they wanted to tell you. And sometimes I think I began to get that insight, and I don't mean to dress myself up here in any way at
No,
all,
go for
but
it.
I think I quickly learned that just by chatting to kids and maybe sort of feeding back and having a little joke with them, you could change their mood. Adolescents live on this knife edge between sort of, a downer and an upper and whatever. And they just, 5 minutes later, you can see an adolescent, and often they'll be completely different from the person you saw 5 or 10 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
And you could affect that behavior. And I think it made me realize that teachers have a phenomenal amount of power and influence. And I thought, if
Yeah.
that's used properly, then you're working for the good. Now, obviously, no teacher, no human being ever gets that right the whole time. Of course you don't. But you can strive for it,
Yeah.
and you can try and say things that, and help kids in a way that lifts them a bit and shows them there's a way forward.
Absolutely. And just it's such a powerful thing that you can do when you just treat them as human beings and
Yeah.
you recognize them for who they are and the stories that they have to tell. And I always
Yeah.
like to think that people say, what kind of resort? I used to, when I used to do this course for teacher training course I used to run at the University of Sangha, I used to say to the trainee teachers, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine the classroom. I want you to tell me all the resources that you think there would be in a classroom. And it was, and almost every time, Bob, it was only once it ever happened, but almost every time, not a single one said the kids themselves, the students.
Really.
Yeah. But these were fresh-faced teachers just coming out of a degree and stuff like that, bless them. But the point of the activity was to tell them is that the resource and the tools that are at your disposal are not necessarily that box of glue sticks where half the lids are missing, or the pencils that have been put in not the right way, and then some of the leads are broken, all that kind of stuff. Is actually, if your whiteboard goes down, the electricity goes off, the TV's not working, because when I first started teaching, you used to wheel the TV in and you had the
Of
overhead
course, yeah,
projector. That would,
yeah,
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 that wouldn't turn on, all that kind of stuff. Have no fear, because you've got 20 to 30 resources right in front of you, and that's the
yes,
kids. And so that's how I used to start that session. And yeah, and then they would come away with and then the penny would drop and say, well, of course, that makes total sense. And then and if you're having a tough day teaching, you can actually rely on those kids to kind of give yourself a boost in the same
yes,
manner that you would give them a boost
yes,
by chatting,
yes,
by having a bit of a laugh, by saying to them, yeah, it's been a bit of a tough day, or I was delayed getting such and such to nursery, so I've got in late. I didn't get in, and I like, oh, and there's this one young lady. I'll mention her, Tegan. Very fond memories of Tegan. Used to knock on my classroom door every lunchtime, and like, excuse me, Miss Rackley, have you had your lunch yet? I'm like, no, I'm just trying to. And she would like, I'm going to stand in this doorway and I'm going to keep knocking on this door until you get up and you go down the cafeteria. I'm like, oh, I was like, she used to mother me, you
yeah,
know. But why did that happen? Was because we had that student teacher professional relationship where I treated her as a human being, she treated me like a human being, and you form those relationships, and it's such a magical thing when that happens.
yeah. And there's a phrase, I forget who uses the phrase in teaching literature, but there's this phrase which I don't really like, but in this case it really applies, which is the kids are ready to learn.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Crikey. I remember that being
Because if
being a thing.
students come into the classroom and they're not ready to learn, if they've got things on their mind that have upset them or whatever's happened, they're not ready to learn, and nothing you can do or say will change that.
Yeah.
But you can.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I used to use that phrase quite. I was one reason why I left the teacher profession, because I was starting to feel way too institutionalized, and I used to use that phrase way too much. You know,
Yeah.
so of course, what would I say? I don't know what I would say differently now, but it's yeah. I'm ready to learn with you, or let's learn together. No, it's all becoming cliche and
Or
silliness
maybe
now.
not give it a name, just get in and do it.
Just get in and
You know,
do it. Yeah, get in and
just
do
start
it.
the lesson and that's it. And yeah.
So even the hangover of being institutionalized, I'm feeling like there has to be a phrase.
Yes, I know. I
Yeah.
know.
Oh, okay. Well, Bob, we will start drawing this wonderful, wonderful chat to a close. We're going to do one last thing, and I'm going to link you back to the previous guest, because last time I had the wonderful Jen Monk on.
Yep.
And she was absolutely tickled to hear that you were following her, because I don't say who the next guest is going to be
Right.
before this little feature that we're going to do, because it will spoil it and it wouldn't be fun. But the "We Are All Geographers" feature is when we give a word. The guest gives a word for the following guest to match to geography for 30 seconds. If they struggle with
Okay.
that, they can just talk about it for 30 seconds. It's fine. So Jen had to talk about the word toaster, because we for some strange reason we had a run of white goods and kitchen goods.
Right.
So toaster, and then Jen wanted to carry on with this whole kitchen theme, right? And she was like looking around. She said, "I'm going to give the next guest that got to talk about tomato ketchup for 30 seconds."
Well, I love tomato ketchup.
Well, yeah, it's going to be suiting
How,
you.
how could you not love tomato
And
ketchup?
and then after we finished recording, I then said to her, "Jen, that's what you've just given Bob Digby." And she just was just like, so she's going to be listening very keenly, Bob, to you talk about tomato ketchup for 30 seconds.
Well, Mick and I have a lovely gardener called Darren who comes to help out with the garden, because we're lucky enough to have quite a big garden and it needs a lot of maintenance. And he comes in on his day when he works for us, which is every other Monday. He comes in for bacon sandwiches on Monday lunchtime, on which he refuses to have tomato ketchup. And I don't understand anyone in the world who can avoid putting bacon and tomato ketchup together, because if ever there was a marriage made in heaven, it is bacon and tomato ketchup.
Wow.
So there we go. That's what I
That's,
think about tomato ketchup. I love tomato ketchup.
there you go, folks.
I
Yeah.
used to eat tomato ketchup sandwiches when I was a child if I
I
was hungry.
Okay. Now, I will admit, I was one of those kids who went for a phase of tomato ketchup on everything.
Yep.
So it'd be like, okay, so your typical stuff, right? Pie and mash, sausage and mash, fine. Tomato ketchup, yep, that's fine. Pizza, tomato ketchup on
Oh,
top of it.
oh, really? Oh, that might
Yeah,
be good. That's a bit extreme.
pasta, tomato ketchup on that. Yeah, it was. I just went through this phase where it just lumped it on everything. I don't know why. I was just probably my taste buds were acting up through adolescence. I don't know, and I just felt tomato ketchup was maybe this mental anchor that got me through my food. I don't know,
That's just what it was. Yeah.
but oh no. Right. So, what are you going to give for the next guest, Bob? What's going to be your word or phrase that they're going to chat about for 30 seconds?
Well, this is the thing I last used before we came on air on this, so I'm going to say scissors.
Scissors.
There we
And
go.
actually, Bob is
That's the
showing me
word.
some very shiny pair of metal scissors.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we get a little bit more sensible, folks. So we've gone through this whole craziness of toasters and tomato ketchup, and now we've got scissors. We can actually do something with scissors.
Well,
Now.
either that, or I've got a mouse mat which has got Andrew Scott.
If you were 10 years old, would that be one of your childhood crushes, Bob?
If I was 40 years old, it might be one of my childhood crushes. Don't set boundaries around this one.
No, okay, fair enough. Wow. Yeah. No.
I have a school friend of some 61 years. We've been friends, and she gave me that for Christmas 2 years ago.
Wonderful.
So, yeah,
She knows you very well.
she knows me very well indeed. Indeed.
Oh, Bob, this has been so delightful. So before we shout shoot off, then, so you got any shout outs you'd like to give? This is the hardest question of the entire podcast: is who do you want to say hi to, if anybody?
It is. I'm going to shout out to an organisation, the GA, because I love the GA, and I don't do what I do with the GA because out of a sense of duty. It is a sense of duty, but I love the GA and I love the people within it.
Mm-hmm.
And being part of it is an absolute privilege. I'm going to give a shout out to all the people on Twitter. They know who they are, who are just brilliant, absolutely wonderful for supporting each other. I think I've kind of intimated, I'm in the back seat now as far as the classroom teaching career is concerned. But there are lots of people who get up every morning and go to work. Some of them are up, there's one guy I follow, he's up at about 25 to 6 each morning.
Yeah.
He catches the DLR to get to teach in East London, and, he's a Senko and so on. I just think of people like that. And there's Paula Owens, who does all her wonderful primary work. And Paula's like me, she's never going to stop working. I know that. Because she brings a lot of love to the job. And so I'd like to just give a big shout out to anybody who brings love to the job, because I think that's what teaching's all about.
Oh, that's beautiful. And you mentioned Twitter. So I imagine that a lot of people listening, Bob, have already connected with you on Twitter. But if for some strange reason they haven't yet, or they're learning about you for the first time now, how can they find you on Twitter? What's your handle?
Or if they're thinking, who is this geezer?
Who is this geezer?
Shut up. Let me unfollow him right now. It's at Bob Digby.
There you go. Simple as that, folks. At Bob Digby. Please do connect with Bob. As said, he loves his Twitter, and he'll be very, very happy to connect and chat to you about all things geography and Adam Scott. Right. Bob, thank you so much. This was long overdue. I've had such fun, such a laugh, and it's been great to just have the opportunity just to sit down and chat to you for once. So
great.
Because sometimes we're passing ships of the night when we're at a conference and we're busy. We get to chat, but we're then shooting off to a session or something like that. But to sit down and have an hour's chat with you, Bob, has been absolutely delightful. So thank you so much.
It's been a privilege. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you had fun. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe so more stories and experiences can drop into your favourite podcast app. If you fancy being a guest or have any feedback, follow us on Twitter at coffeegeogpod and send us a DM. Or you could email coffeeandgeog@geogramblings.com. Until next time, keep geogging.